You know, when we think of ancient Egypt, we picture these massive pyramids, right? Golden pharaohs, all that glory. But what happens when a golden age just ends? What comes after? Well, we're about to dive into one of the most mysterious and honestly one of the most critical periods in all of Egyptian history, the Second Dynasty.
So, after the incredibly powerful First Dynasty managed to unify the entire kingdom, you'd think things would just keep getting better. But nope, that's not what happened. The whole thing fractured. It completely fell apart into this period of crisis, instability, and conflict. The dream of a unified Egypt was literally on the verge of disappearing almost as soon as it had started.
So, the big question is, how on earth did Egypt pull itself back from the brink? Well, the answer lies in the story of this Second Dynasty, a period that really wasn't defined by great conquests, but by a desperate, messy struggle just to survive.
All right, so to really get a handle on this dynasty, we have to start right where the previous one ended, in this absolute storm of uncertainty and chaos. This was not some smooth, peaceful transition of power. It was a birth from total turmoil.
And what's really fascinating here is the gap. You see, when King Ka, the very last ruler of the First Dynasty, died, the historical record just goes fuzzy. This wasn't a simple, the king is dead, long live the king kind of thing. It almost certainly points to a violent power struggle, or maybe a period of intense civil unrest. We just don't know for sure.
And the biggest clue we have is actually hidden in plain sight. It's the name of the very first king of this new dynasty, Hotepsekhemwy. His name literally translates to, the two powers are reconciled. Now, you don't take a name like that unless there were two powers that were, very recently not reconciled. His name isn't a boast, it's a political statement. It's basically a huge sigh of relief that some major conflict had finally ended.
But here's the thing about that reconciliation. It was fragile. The peace that Hotepsekhemwy established was more like putting a Band-Aid on a huge wound. And very, very quickly, those deep divisions that had torn Egypt apart started to reappear. The cracks began to show.
So the next king, Reyneb, he makes this quiet but totally revolutionary change. He becomes the first pharaoh to incorporate the name of the sun god Ra into his own royal name. Now, that might seem like a small detail, but you have to understand, this was a radical religious shift. It marked the very beginning of the sun cult that would go on to define Egypt for millennia, and it hinted that the old ways just weren't enough to hold the kingdom together anymore.
And then, under King Nyecher, the evidence gets even more dramatic. It really suggests that Egypt was literally split in two. Now, was this just an administrative choice, an easier way to manage a complex kingdom? That's one theory. But the more likely one, the political schism was so deep, so toxic, that the country just fractured.
And this division wasn't just political anymore. Oh no, it was about to erupt into a full-blown spiritual civil war, and it all centered on a pharaoh who made a choice that would have been absolutely unthinkable at the time.
Okay, picture this. For generations, the entire identity of the pharaoh was unshakably linked to one specific god. To be the king was to be the living embodiment of this deity on earth. And then one king comes along and just rejects it all.
So at the very heart of Egyptian kingship were these two rival gods. On one side, you've got Horus, the falcon god of the sky, of order, and of kingship itself. The pharaoh was the living Horus, simple as that. On the other side, you have his eternal rival, Seth, the god of chaos, of violent storms, of the harsh, unforgiving desert. He was, for all intents and purposes, the enemy. And then, a king named Peribsen comes to power and just completely flips the table. He rejects the sacred title of living Horus and instead declares himself the earthly representative of Seth. This was a seismic shock to the entire system. It was a massive statement of rebellion that probably reflected the huge political divide between the north and the south of Egypt.
I mean, this divine civil war could have been the end. A kingdom split politically and now spiritually, it seemed absolutely doomed. But just as the conflict reached its breaking point, one final ruler emerged with a truly radical solution.
His name was Khasekhemwy. He inherited this completely broken country, a nation literally at war with its own soul. He faced a choice, either crush the followers of Seth or be crushed by the followers of Horus.
He did neither. In a move of what I can only call political and religious genius, Khasekhemwy refused to choose a side. Instead, he placed the symbols of both Horus and Seth right on top of his royal crest. He was sending a message. He wasn't the king of one faction, he was the king of a united Egypt, a ruler who contained and balanced both order and chaos. He ended the civil war by absorbing it into his very identity. Just brilliant.
So, if this dynasty was so full of chaos and conflict, what is its actual legacy? It's really easy to look at this period and just see a bunch of trouble, but that would be missing the entire point.
Let's just be crystal clear. The Second Dynasty built exactly 0 Great Pyramids. They left behind no great wonders of the world, no massive monuments that tourists are flocking to see today, and if you measure them by that standard, well, they might seem like a bit of a failure.
But here is their true, incredible achievement. Their mission wasn't to build pyramids. Their mission was to build the foundation upon which pyramids could finally be built. Think about it. First, they had to end the Civil War. Then they had to forge a new political and religious stability out of the ashes. And by doing that, they paved the way directly for the next era, the Old Kingdom, King Djoser, and the very first pyramids. Without the Second Dynasty's painful, messy struggle for reunification, there would be no Age of Pyramids. It's that simple. Their legacy isn't written in giant stones, but in the very survival of Egyptian civilization itself. So this isn't a story about grand builders or mighty conquerors. It's a story about saviors.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? We so often measure greatness by what is built, by the big things we can see. But maybe the truer measure of greatness is what is saved. So, which is greater, an age that builds monuments or an age that prevents a civilization from collapsing in the first place? Something to think about.